Weeks of silence will teach you things a lifetime of noise never could. My daughter thought I was helpless. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a lot of things, but that particular mistake cost her more than she'd budgeted for, and cost her in ways she's still accounting for. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My name is Logan Brent, 75 years old, retired civil engineer. Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised, in the kind of neighborhood where people still wave at each other from their driveways and mean it, not the performative wave of people who want to appear neighborly, but the real one, the one that says, I see you, we're in this together. I spent 38 years designing load-bearing structures for the state of Tennessee and 3 neighboring states: bridges, overpasses, retention walls, the kind of infrastructure that holds everything else up without anyone noticing it's there. The best civil engineering is invisible. When it works, nobody thinks about it. When it fails, that's all anyone thinks about. The thing they don't tell you about that kind of work, the thing you learn slowly over decades, is that it teaches you patience of a very specific variety. Not the passive kind, not waiting around hoping things resolve themselves. The active kind. The kind that understands the difference between a crack that's merely cosmetic and a crack that represents a structural threat, and knows that the only way to tell them apart is to stop, get close, document carefully, and resist every instinct to act before you fully understand what you're looking at. Premature action in structural engineering doesn't just fail to fix the problem. It frequently makes the problem significantly worse. That patience, more than anything else I have to offer this story, is what this is actually about. My wife Rebecca is 70 years old and has been the best decision I ever made. This is not sentiment. I am an engineer. I deal in load capacity and material properties and the mathematics of stress and strain, not sentiment. It is an assessment. We met at a church social in 1976, when she was 20 and I was 25, and she told me inside of 11 minutes that she thought my tie was hideous and my opinion on the political climate was underdeveloped. I argued back on the tie and conceded on the politics, which she later told me was the correct position on both counts. I married her 14 months later, and I have never in 50 years been bored. I have been challenged, occasionally maddened, frequently humbled, and consistently grateful, but never bored. We built our life on Elmwood Drive in a house I bought at 31, a 3-bedroom brick colonial with a yard that starts flat and then slopes gently down toward a line of oak trees that Rebecca has spent 50 years attending to, the way some people attend to children. They are, at this point, magnificent trees. The house has absorbed 50 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings and ordinary weekday evenings, and the accumulated weight of a life lived fully inside it, and it has the particular warmth of a place that has been genuinely inhabited rather than merely occupied. Rebecca was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 18 months ago. Mild cognitive impairment, her neurologist Dr. Nadia Randy called it. Precise clinical language applied to a thing that is brutal and unglamorous and nothing like the language used to describe it. Rebecca still knew who I was, who our friends were, the words to every hymn she had ever learned. She still made cornbread from memory without a written recipe. The way you do things you've done so long they've become part of the body's knowledge rather than the mind's. She still called her sister Diane every Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock precisely, and those conversations still ran long and warm, and full of the particular shorthand of 2 women who have known each other for 70 years. But she lost time, sometimes. Forgot where she'd placed things she'd just set down, got turned around in the middle of conversations she'd been having for decades. Dr. Randy told us the progression was difficult to predict. It might be slow, might plateau, might not. She gave us resources and referred us to a support group and was kind about the whole thing, in a way that managed not to be condescending, which I appreciated more than she probably knew. We did not announce the diagnosis broadly. We told Diane. We told our pastor, Brother Calvin, who had known us for 30 years, and who we trusted to hold information the way he held everything, carefully, privately, with genuine pastoral concern rather than the kind of community-minded concern that passes information along. And we told our daughter, Abigail. That last decision was the crack that looked like it didn't matter. Abigail was 31 years old, our only child, born after 9 years of trying, and 2 losses I will not describe in detail because they live in a room inside me that I don't enter unnecessarily. She was wanted the way that only a child who nearly didn't arrive can be wanted. Completely. fiercely, with the full accumulated weight of 9 years of hoping, which is a different and more absolute kind of wanting than the ordinary kind. She was brilliant in the ways that mattered to other people's first impressions, and complicated in the ways that mattered to everything after that. Sharp-tongued when she wanted to be charming, and cold when the room didn't require anything from her. She moved through the world with the ease of someone who had always found it manageable, which is a quality that can reflect genuine capability or genuine obliviousness, and often reflects some compound of both. Growing up, there were signs that Rebecca and I interpreted with the generosity that parents apply to their children's less flattering qualities. The manipulations that seemed too engineered for a 10-year-old. The friendships that ended with the other child in tears more often than felt statistically likely. The way she accepted praise with complete ease and deflected accountability with equal smoothness, always finding the explanation that relocated fault somewhere other than herself, and doing it so naturally that you were halfway persuaded before you realized you'd been moved. Rebecca's sister Diane called her a handful at family gatherings with a smile that stopped shy of her eyes. I told myself Diane didn't fully understand her. I was her father. Understanding her was my job and my privilege, and I did it with more love than accuracy, which is the particular failing of parents who love their children more than they love being right about them. We paid for her college. Rebecca picked up 12 additional hours a week at the dental office where she worked to cover the gap between what my salary could carry and what the tuition required. We paid off her student loans in one lump payment the week after her graduation ceremony. $31,000 gone before she ever had to think about it. We bought her a car and insured it for the first 2 years while she found her footing. And then we opened a bakery. Abigail had always loved baking. From the time she was 9, she spent hours in our kitchen producing things that were, even by the objective standard of a man with no particular gift for dessert, genuinely extraordinary. The layering on her baklava at 14. The croissants she started making at 17, which took her 11 attempts to get right, and which, when she finally got them right, were the kind of croissants that stop a conversation. She had a real gift, and she knew it, and we believed in it completely. Sweet Brent's Pastry Co. opened on Gallatin Avenue in East Nashville in the 3rd year after her college graduation. A real storefront with a proper commercial kitchen, professional equipment, a 5-year lease in a neighborhood that was growing fast and had exactly the appetite for good pastry that a committed baker should want. We invested $60,000, everything we had that was not in retirement accounts, spent without hesitation, without contracts, without the formality of paperwork that would have felt like distrust between a father and the daughter he was betting on. Rebecca designed the logo herself over 3 weekends at a borrowed computer, trying variations until she got the font and the weight of the line exactly right. I painted the interior on 2 Saturdays and a Sunday in September, 68 years old on a 6-foot ladder with paint in my hair, because it was her place, and I wanted my hands in the work of it. We were proud. That is the plain fact of it. We were proud of her and proud of what we'd built for her, and completely unprepared for what followed. The bakery lasted 3 years. It did not close because East Nashville didn't want what she made. It didn't close because the location was wrong, or the timing was off, or the market shifted against her. It closed because Abigail, who could produce pastry of genuine quality, had no durable grasp on the management of a business. Staff were hired on impulse and lost through carelessness. Supplier relationships degraded when invoices went unpaid past the point that goodwill covered. The books, when a proper accountant finally sat down with them, told the story of someone who had not distinguished between business revenue and personal income, and who had made optimistic assumptions about cash flow that the actual numbers did not support. And then there was Derek Pell. Derek Pell came into the bakery on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd year of its operation, ordered a coffee and a lemon tart, and left 45 minutes later with Abigail's interest and the beginnings of a plan. He presented himself as a hospitality investment specialist, a man who identified high-potential opportunities in the Southeast's boutique hotel and restaurant market, and assembled investor pools to capitalize on them. He had materials. He had testimonials. He had the particular fluency in financial language that impresses people who don't know the language well enough to test it. He had, in short, everything that a Ponzi scheme requires in its early presentation. Enough structure to look legitimate, enough warmth to bypass scrutiny, and enough urgency to prevent the target from taking the time that scrutiny would require. Abigail invested $38,000 of the bakery's operating capital into Derek Pell's hospitality investment collective. She did this without telling us. She told us about it 8 months later, when the structure had collapsed entirely, and the money was gone, and Derek Pell was already the subject of a federal investigation involving 14 investors across 3 states. We absorb this information the way you absorb information at our age when you've already given everything you had to give. Quietly, with a careful, deliberate decision not to say the things that rose immediately to mind, because the things that rise immediately to mind are not always the things that need to be said. We did not say "I told you so." We had not, in fact, told her so. We had trusted her with $60,000, and a belief that was worth more than the money. That trust was on us, and the loss of it was on us too, and we accepted that. We loved her anyway, completely, without conditions attached to the love. Because she was ours. That love was the crack that looked like it didn't matter, until the day it was the thing that nearly took everything. Let me tell you about Jordan Voss. Abigail brought him to Thanksgiving the year after the bakery closed, when she was 29 and he was 35, and she seemed for the first time in several years genuinely settled in her own skin. He was tall, well-dressed without being overdressed, with an easy manner and the kind of smile that arrives just slightly faster than the thing that prompted it, which is a small thing, but the kind of small thing I notice. He complimented Rebecca's cooking in specifics rather than generalities. Not just "this is wonderful," but the particular texture of the cornbread, the depth of seasoning in the collard greens, the details that told you he had actually paid attention. He asked me questions about my career that suggested he had done a minimum of research beforehand, and he listened to the answers in the manner of someone who has learned that listening is a tool. He helped clear the table without being prompted, and dry dishes without needing to be shown where they went. Rebecca liked him. She told me afterward that she thought he was lovely. I did not trust him, and I want to be honest that I did not have a precise articulable reason sitting at the surface. It was something more animal than reasoning. The instinct you develop over decades of looking at things other people have built, and finding the place where the stress is accumulating in ways the external appearance doesn't reveal. Something about the fluency of his warmth, something about the way the smile arrived. I filed it and said nothing, because a feeling is not an argument, and I had no argument to make. What I did not know at Thanksgiving was that Jordan Voss had a criminal record that would have given me considerably more than a feeling to work with. A fraud conviction in Meade County, Kentucky in 2016. A real estate investment scheme. He'd solicited money from 3 investors for a property acquisition that existed primarily on paper, pocketed the funds, and used the proceeds to fund his life, while stringing the investors along with updates and excuses until the structure became impossible to maintain. He served 18 months at a Kentucky correctional facility. 2 years after his release, he was charged again in Fulton County, Georgia. A similar scheme, different market, same essential method. That one was pleaded down to a misdemeanor through what must have been capable representation. Abigail knew about at least the Kentucky conviction. She told us this later in a conversation where it could only function as context rather than warning. She had told herself he had changed, that she understood him in a way other people were too quick to judge to access. This is what it looks like when someone with narcissistic tendencies falls for a practiced con man. Each one is convinced they are the one with the actual leverage. Neither one is right. They are 2 people who are each trying to run a play on the other, except one of them is an amateur, and one of them has been doing it professionally for years. They suited each other, superficially, and they were going to become my problem in a way I could not yet fully see. My hearing loss happened on a Thursday morning in March. I will tell you about it plainly. I woke at 6 and Rebecca was in the kitchen, and I could feel the faint transmission of her footsteps through the floor, and when she appeared in the bedroom doorway her mouth was moving, and there was nothing, no sound, just a low underwater hum, the world wrapped in material that swallowed everything that should have been audible. I lay there and watched her speak and understood that something had changed significantly overnight. I want to account for this experience without making it the center of the story, because it is not the center. What it created was the appearance of a man who was diminished. A man whose capacity was visibly reduced, a man whose wife was also dealing with a documented cognitive condition. The combination of those 2 facts, viewed through a certain lens, made us look like an opportunity. The diagnosis was sudden sensory neural hearing loss, bilateral, both ears simultaneously. My ENT, Dr. Kessler, explained that the cause was likely a rare complication of the sinus infection I'd had 3 weeks prior. He described the statistical odds of bilateral sudden onset with something approaching professional wonder. We tried corticosteroids. We tried hyperbaric oxygen therapy over 6 sessions. We monitored. We waited. Rebecca learned sign language from YouTube in a week and a half. This is a completely accurate statement. She identified what she needed, found it for free on the internet, and mastered enough of it within 10 days to communicate with me functionally, and sometimes when I signed something incorrectly, quite humorously. She made laminated cards for the common phrases and kept them in her cardigan pocket. She laughed with me when laughter was the right response, and sat with me quietly when it wasn't, and held my hand across every table and every silence. I have loved Rebecca for 50 years, and I have measured that love at various points in our life together, and during those 4 weeks I discovered reserves I hadn't known to account for. Abigail visited on day 3 of my hearing loss. She arrived with the energy of a person who has already decided what a situation means, and needs only to confirm it. She sat at our kitchen table and she talked about facilities. Places that specialized, she explained, in situations where both members of an elderly couple were managing health challenges concurrently. The word elderly landed on me a certain way. I am 75. I have designed infrastructure that will outlast me by a century. Elderly is not a word that is ever particularly applied to how I move through the world. Your father is not going anywhere, Rebecca told her. He has a hearing impairment. He does not have a condition of incapacity. Mom, I'm being practical. You're being premature. He is perfectly healthy in every respect except one that may well resolve on its own. I watched Abigail's face from across the table. By day 3, I was already decent at lip reading, which is one of those skills the brain acquires rapidly when it needs to. And I watched the thing that happened on Abigail's face when Rebecca closed the conversation. A flicker across the surface features, there for less than a second, smoothed over by the practiced warmth she wore the way other people wear glasses. You would miss it entirely if you weren't already looking for it. I was already looking for it. I had been, in the back of my mind, since Thanksgiving. Before she left, she asked about our paperwork. Just casually, had we updated our power of attorney documents recently? With everything going on, it was probably smart to confirm things were current. Rebecca said we were fine and had always been fine. Abigail said, of course, she just wanted to make sure we were taken care of. Said it with the warmth of genuine filial concern. And left. I sat in my recliner after she drove away, and I held the flicker in my memory and turned it over and looked at it from different angles, the way you look at a new piece of data before you know what model it belongs to. My hearing returned on a Tuesday at 5:52 in the morning, 28 days after it left. A mockingbird started outside the bedroom window. Nashville is full of them, those birds that never seem to run out of material. And the sound arrived completely and immediately, like a door opening. I lay in the gray early light and listened to my wife breathing beside me, and I did not move for a long time. I did not wake her, and I want to be careful about explaining why, because the reason matters. It was not strategy yet. It was instinct. The instinct of a man who has spent a long career identifying where the load is actually being carried versus where the structure is merely appearing to carry it. Something in the recent architecture of events, the visit, the questions, the facility talk, the flicker, was telling me that the silence had value I had not yet fully extracted, that announcing its end immediately would close a window that I had not yet looked through completely. Rebecca's brother Hugh was recovering from hip surgery in Clarksville. She drove back and forth twice that week, staying overnight on the Tuesday. 3 days after my hearing returned, she kissed me on the cheek and told me she'd be back by Thursday evening, and I wrote on the notepad I carried everywhere, my deaf man's prop, as necessary to the performance as the exaggerated lip-reading lean and the apologetic smiles when conversation moved too fast. I wrote that I was fine, that she should go, that I loved her. She went, and I sat alone in the house on Elmwood Drive, and waited for the silence to show me what it was holding. Abigail texted that afternoon, just checking in, Daddy. Thinking about you. I put the phone face down on the end table. She arrived at 3:15 p.m. with her key. We had given Abigail a key to the house on Elmwood Drive 7 years ago, during a period when we'd been traveling more frequently and wanted someone we trusted to be able to check on the place. We had never formally asked for it back when the reason for giving it had passed. Because you don't think about that. You give your child a key to your house, and then you stop thinking about the key because it's your child and the key was never really the point. The point was the trust the key represented. That trust, as I was about to learn, had been misread in one direction by one of the parties holding it. I heard the front door open. I heard her heels on the hardwood. She wore heels on a Tuesday afternoon visit to her deaf, elderly, home-alone father, which is information. I was in the sunroom at the back of the house, in the chair by the window where I spend most mornings, with a book I was not reading, and absolutely no indication of having heard anything. She stopped in the entry hall. "He's in the back," she said quietly. "Come in. It's fine. He can't hear anything." The front door opened a second time. "Jordan." I set the book down with the deliberate care of a man who is very certain of what he is doing. "How long do we have?" Jordan said. His voice had the quality I had noticed at Thanksgiving. That easy, professionally relaxed register. The voice of a man who has spent considerable effort learning to sound like the least pressured person in whatever room he's in. "Until Thursday at the earliest. Mom won't be back before evening." "Good." Something set down on the entry bench. A bag from the sound of it. "Walk me through it again." "We've been through it multiple. We go through it again." The ease shifted. Not harshly, he was too controlled for that, but decisively. "Because I need to know that when this moves, it moves cleanly. One mistake at the wrong moment, and this whole thing comes apart. So we go through it again." A pause. Then Abigail, quieter. "Fine." I breathed slowly and listened and did not move. "The power of attorney," Jordan said. "I've spoken to the attorney's office. Given Dad's hearing loss and Mom's documented dementia diagnosis, they said we have reasonable grounds to petition for full guardianship rather than limited POA. Full guardianship means we control decisions across the board. Medical, financial, residential, everything. The house, paid off completely. I've been running comparable sales for the past month. This street, this lot size, this square footage, we're looking at 400,000 minimum, possibly 450 depending on market timing. Once we have guardianship, the sale is our call. We petition that maintaining a property of this size and complexity is not in their best interest given their combined health circumstances. It's standard language in guardianship proceedings. Proceeds go into a guardianship account. That you manage. Yes. I heard the refrigerator open. Heard ice. The ordinary sounds of two people making themselves comfortable in a house they were actively planning to take. The accounts, Jordan said. I've had access to the household checking for almost 2 years. It was legitimate originally. When Mom had her knee replacement and Dad was doing consulting travel, they added me to help manage regular bills. I kept the access after things normalized. I've been careful. Small amounts, irregular timing, nothing that would read as a pattern on a casual statement review. How much? Just over 30,000. Silence. A long one. In 2 years, Jordan said. I've been careful. I told you that from the beginning. We need to move faster, Abigail. The warmth was entirely gone now. The situation I described to you, the financial obligations I have, they are not on a schedule that accommodates your caution. I need this to accelerate. The guardianship filing gets us the full picture at once. Once it's filed, we're in control, and everything else follows from that. I did not know yet what the financial obligations were that he hadn't described to her fully. I would find out later. At that moment I was processing what I had. My daughter had been taking money from our joint household account for close to 2 years. She had spoken to an attorney about petitioning for legal guardianship over me and her mother. She intended to sell the house I had owned for 44 years and place us in a managed care facility. Not because we needed it, but because she and Jordan Voss needed the money. And whatever Jordan was being pressured by needed it sooner than she'd planned. 30,000, she thought she had taken. She had lost count somewhere, or she'd been rounding for her own comfort, or she'd simply stopped tracking closely because the category of careful attention she'd never mastered was the one that required detailed record-keeping. I am a details man. I have always been a details man. 3 years of account statements sat in my filing cabinet in the study, organized by month, annotated, because that is how I have always kept financial records, and that is not a habit that diminishes with age. I had not been looking for a pattern in those statements because I had had no reason to look. I had every reason now. They moved from the entry hall to the kitchen. I heard the chair pull out, heard the ordinary sounds of 2 people settling in. I counted to 60. I breathed. I thought about what I was going to do next, and in what order and what it would require of me. An engineer's assessment. What are the load points? What is the sequence? What is the first action that does not foreclose any subsequent action? Then I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and walked down the hall. Abigail was at the counter. Jordan sat at my kitchen table with an open folder in front of him. I could see the edges of papers. When I appeared in the doorway, both of them produced expressions of warm and startled welcome. with the practiced speed of people who have considered in advance the possibility that they might need that expression. Abigail crossed the kitchen and hugged me. Over her shoulder, I watched Jordan close the folder in one unhurried movement. Completely natural, the action of a man who had closed folders in front of people who weren't supposed to know about them, on a sufficient number of prior occasions, that it had become smooth. I returned the hug. I smiled at Jordan. I sat down at the kitchen table, picked up my notepad, and wrote, "Good to see you both. Staying for dinner." We spent an hour together. They spoke to me the way you speak to someone who cannot hear. Measured pace, clear enunciation, maintaining the eye contact that confirms the lip reading is working. Jordan was very good. He told me, through gesture and Abigail's written translation, that Rebecca's oatmeal cookies were the finest he'd encountered in the state of Tennessee. He held eye contact with the frank openness of a man who has nothing to conceal and everything to offer. He was gracious and warm and completely, entirely convincing. I smiled and nodded and was deaf to all of it. When they left, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands on the surface for a while. Then I picked up my phone and called Bill Archer. Bill and I had known each other since Vanderbilt in 1970. He had built a practice in estate planning and asset protection over 40 years, the kind of practice that attracts clients who are doing careful things rather than reactive ones. We had stayed connected in the low-maintenance way of men who have known each other long enough that the connection doesn't require constant maintenance, but who each know that certain calls are not social calls and will be answered accordingly. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The hearing, the recovery, the 28 days of silence, what I had heard that afternoon from the sunroom, the account access, the guardianship plan, the amount she had reported to Jordan. When I finished, Bill was quiet for a moment. "The statements," he said. "How far back?" 3 years. Filed by month. How organized? Annotated. A brief pause. "Of course they are." He cleared his throat. "The authorization she has on the household account, original scope, bill payment while Rebecca was recovering from knee replacement 2 years ago, and I had a consulting engagement that required travel. We never formally removed her when the circumstances changed. So the authorization is legitimate, but the use has exceeded its scope by a significant margin. That's the foundation we build from there." He paused. "Has she filed anything yet?" "As of this afternoon, they were still in the planning stage." "Good. I'd rather cut this off before it reaches any court than fight it after. A preemptive motion establishing documented legal capacity supported by your physicians stops the guardianship argument before it gains traction." Another pause. "The boyfriend. Tell me." I told him what I knew at that point, which was not yet what I would know 2 days later. He told me to find out more before Thursday. Over the next 2 days, I did what I should have done. The autumn Jordan sat at my Thanksgiving table and dried dishes in my kitchen, and told me my wife's cornbread was the finest in the state of Tennessee. I sat at my desk with my laptop and a yellow legal pad, the same setup I had used for 38 years when I was working a problem, and I looked. I am, as it turns out, a methodical man. I always have been. Jordan Voss, 37 years old. No fixed employer of record in Tennessee for the past 3 years. He described himself in various public filings as a hospitality investment consultant and a real estate development advisor, which are phrases that mean something specific when attached to something real and mean nothing at all when they're not. 2 dormant business entities in the Nashville registry with his name on them. A LinkedIn profile with 63 connections, and a photograph taken somewhere with good light and no identifiable background. The kind of photo you take when you want to appear professional, without providing any context someone might verify. Then I went to the court records. Meade County, Kentucky, 2016. A fraud conviction. Real estate investment scheme. He had solicited funds from 3 investors for a property acquisition in western Kentucky, produced documentation that was credible enough on first review, collected the money, and then managed the investors through a series of updates and reasonable-sounding delays until the structure could not be maintained any longer. He had been thorough enough that it took his victims 11 months to escalate to law enforcement. He had served 18 months at a Kentucky correctional facility and been released in 2018. I sat with that for a while. 11 months. He had kept 3 investors placated for 11 months. That requires a specific kind of patience and a specific kind of skill, and neither of them develops quickly. This was not a man who had made one bad decision under pressure. This was a man who had practiced. Fulton County, Georgia, 2019. A second charge. Different geography, different pool of investors. Same essential method. That one had been pleaded to a misdemeanor, which told me two things. The attorney he had in Georgia was considerably more capable than the one in Kentucky, and the evidence or the victims in the Georgia case had been less organized, or both. He had paid a fine and served no additional time and moved, as far as I could determine, to Nashville. I looked at the legal pad and I thought about the Thanksgiving table. The cornbread complement with its specific details, the texture, the seasoning, the things that told you he'd paid real attention. The engineering questions asked with what I had read as genuine curiosity. The dishes dried without being asked where to put them. I thought about Rebecca saying she found him lovely. He was a craftsman, a genuinely skilled one, in his particular and ugly craft. He studied the people he targeted, learned what they responded to, and produced it with precision, not improvised, not approximate, but precise. The warmth was a tool he had sharpened over years, and sharpened further across 18 months in a correctional facility, and then sharpened again in Georgia, and then brought to my kitchen table in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I found Patricia Lorne, filed 7 weeks ago in Davidson County, right here in Nashville. The plaintiff was 63 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Antioch. The allegation was conversion of funds from a joint account held in both their names. The joint account had been established 18 months before the filing, when Patricia Lorne and Jordan Voss had begun what the complaint described as a committed personal relationship. The disputed amount was $61,000. A joint account, the same method, a different woman, the same play, run again with the same patience. I stared at that filing for a long time. Then I thought about what Jordan had said in my kitchen, the obligations I have, the timeline that cannot accommodate your caution. He was facing a civil suit for $61,000. He needed money to fight it, or to settle it quietly before it progressed further, or to simply disappear. And the money he was counting on was the money Abigail was going to generate by liquidating mine. The whole structure of it sat on the legal pad in my own handwriting, and I felt the feeling I have felt many times over 38 years of engineering work. When a structural problem reveals itself completely, not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter than both. The feeling of understanding what you are actually looking at, the feeling that comes right before you know what to do about it. I called Bill back. He has a pattern, I said. He finds women with access to money and runs the same play every time. Abigail is not his first. There is a civil suit filed in Davidson County 7 weeks ago. A woman named Patricia Lorne, 63 years old. $61,000 from a joint account. Bill was quiet. The Lorne suit was filed 7 weeks ago, I said. That is exactly when he started telling Abigail the timeline needed to accelerate. He needed money from her scheme to cover his exposure from the last one. Is Abigail named in the Lorne filing? No, but she doesn't need to be. The timing speaks clearly enough. A long pause. It won't change what she did legally, but it changes what she understood herself to be part of. I know, I said. File on Thursday. Bill filed a civil complaint citing unauthorized financial transactions from the household account over 26 months. When his team had gone through every statement, the total was not $30,000. It was $41,230. I called Abigail's number, 26 months of small, careful amounts, each one chosen for plausible deniability, and they added up to $41,230. Bill simultaneously filed a preemptive motion contesting any future guardianship proceedings, supported by documentation from Dr. Kessler and Dr. Randy confirming that neither a resolved bilateral hearing loss nor early-stage mild cognitive impairment constituted legal incapacity under Tennessee statute. He named Abigail in the motion and outlined the scheme with enough specificity that any attorney she retained would immediately understand the position they were taking on. He also submitted a declaration to the Davidson County Court connecting Jordan Voss to the activities under complaint, placing his civil proceedings in the record alongside ours. We could not charge Jordan directly. We could make him visible. I told Rebecca everything the night before the filing. I made tea and sat her down at the kitchen table in the same chairs we have sat in for 44 years. And I told her completely and without omission, from the Tuesday morning the mockingbird woke me to the Thursday afternoon in the sunroom, to the phone call to Bill, to the account statements spread across my desk. She went through every stage while I watched. The disbelief, then the hurt, then the grief and rage together, a combination I had not seen on her face in 50 years. She did not cry. She held my hand across the table and she looked at me with the same eyes she had looked at me with at that church social in 1976, with that exact quality of clear and level assessment. "What do we need to do?" she said. "Trust me," I said. "Logan Brent." She held my hand with both of hers. "Name one time in 50 years I haven't." Abigail was served on a Thursday morning. Bill confirmed it. My phone lit up 40 minutes later with 11 texts in 23 minutes. Moving through confusion, panic, and the particular register that invoked family as though the word dissolved would have been done. I read them. I set the phone down. I thought about $60,000 and a ladder and paint in my hair. About Rebecca at a borrowed computer getting the logo font exactly right. About $41,230 highlighted in yellow. Bill arranged a meeting the following Tuesday. He framed it as a preliminary discussion to explore resolution before the matter advanced. Language that brought her in without full defensive posture deployed. He did not mention I would be there. She arrived in a pressed dark green blazer. She was alone. Jordan had not come, and the absence told me something about what his attorney had already advised him regarding the benefits of visible distance. When she walked into the conference room and saw me, she stopped walking. We looked at each other across the table. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. She absorbed the voice, the implications of the voice, everything the voice meant about what I had heard and when I had heard it. "You can hear," she said. "Since a Tuesday in March, a mockingbird. I almost woke your mother and something told me to wait. You heard us. Not a question. Every word. The sunroom has good acoustics. You were in the entry hall and then the kitchen. I didn't move." She sat down. She looked at the folder Bill slid across the table and she did not touch it. "I can explain." "I know you can," I said. "You've always been able to explain things. That's been one of your gifts since you were about 7 years old, and explained why the broken lamp had broken itself." "Daddy, the number isn't 30,000, I said. "It's $41,230. 26 months. I have every statement filed by date, annotated. I let the number sit. Does that sound like the records of a man who doesn't pay attention to details?" She said nothing. Bill laid out the landscape with the precision and quiet that he has refined over 40 years of delivering information that people do not want to receive. The civil complaint, the criminal referral threshold, the preemptive motion and what it meant for any guardianship proceedings, the documentation of full legal capacity on both our parts. He gave her the complete picture without drama, because the facts did not require drama to be effective. "The guardianship filing would have failed," he said. "The legal standard is substantially higher than what you had. It would have been contested and dismissed at considerable cost to you." She looked at me. The wet edges of her eyes held back. "Dad, I'm your daughter. I know who you are. If we could just—" "Abigail, I sat in that sunroom and I heard you plan it. Not once, not impulsively. You had spoken to an attorney's office. You had been moving money for 26 months. This was not a mistake. This was a plan. Even. Not cold. Even. And Jordan Voss was going to take whatever came out of that plan and use it to fund his obligations from the last woman he did the same thing to. He has a civil suit against him in Davidson County. Patricia Lorne, 63 years old. You were next in a sequence, Abigail. You were not his partner. You were his current resource." Something real crossed her face. The managed surface breaking. "I didn't know about a lawsuit." "I know you didn't. He told me he had financial pressures. He told you what you needed to hear to move faster than was safe for you." I held her eyes. "What he did to you doesn't change what you did to us. But I wanted you to know what you were actually inside of." She left the key with Bill's receptionist. I had the locks changed by end of week. The case resolved over 7 months, and I want to tell you what those 7 months looked like, because they were not a triumphant period. They were a long, quiet, difficult period in which Rebecca and I lived in our house on Elmwood Drive, and managed the absence of the daughter we had raised and loved, and made every mistake about, and tried to be honest with ourselves about what the whole thing had cost. Abigail retained an attorney named Gallagher, young woman, capable, clearly had done this kind of work before. She built the best argument the facts allowed, which was not a strong argument but was a professionally made one. The criminal referral moved through the DA's office across 4 months of procedure and counter-argument and negotiation. There were weeks when nothing seemed to happen at all, and weeks when Bill was calling me twice a day. And through all of it, Rebecca and I maintained the ordinary rhythms of our lives, because the ordinary rhythms were the thing we had, and they were worth maintaining. We still had Sunday dinner. still called Diane, still sat in the kitchen in the mornings with coffee and the newspaper and the quiet that 50 years of marriage produces. The kind of quiet that is not empty but full of the history of every conversation you've already had, and every one you're still capable of having. I fixed a section of the back fence that had been weakening since the previous autumn. Rebecca replanted the corner bed by the oak trees where the soil had compacted. We lived our lives carefully and completely, because the alternative was to let what Abigail had done reach forward into everything, and we had decided that it would not. We did not speak of her constantly. We spoke of her when there was reason to, and we sat with the grief of it when the grief arrived, which it did, in the way grief does, not on a schedule, not with warning, just there suddenly in the middle of an ordinary moment. I drove past Sweet Brent's Pastry Co. on Gallatin Avenue one afternoon, and the sign was still up, new tenants inside, and I sat at the red light and felt something I did not try to name, and drove on. There were people in our community who knew. Diane knew everything, because Diane always knows everything, and she was the one who called me on a Tuesday evening 6 weeks into the proceedings and said simply, "Logan, I want you to know you did the right thing." I thanked her and we talked for 20 minutes about Hugh's recovery and the church garden project and various other things, and she did not press me on any of it, which is why Diane has been my sister-in-law for 50 years without a single day of difficulty between us. Brother Calvin knew the broad strokes. He did not editorialize. He told me he was praying for all of us, and I believed him, and that was all that needed to be said. The outcome of the DA's process, after 4 months and the negotiation that Gallagher conducted with genuine skill, was this: 18 months at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, with eligibility for early release at 12 months under good behavior provisions. It was not the maximum the statute allowed. It was, given the circumstances and Abigail's clean prior record, a considered outcome that I could accept without feeling that justice had been either excessive or insufficient. Gallagher had done her job well. I respected that, even then. Abigail was taken into custody on a Thursday in October. I did not go. Rebecca asked if she should go, and I told her the choice was entirely hers, and that whatever she decided I would support. She thought about it for 2 days, and then she told me she wasn't going, that she needed more time before she could look at Abigail without the grief taking over completely, and that the grief taking over would not serve anyone. I told her that was right. Jordan was not criminally charged in connection with our case. The evidentiary thread connecting his encouragement to Abigail's actions was real and clear to me and to Bill, but the legal standard for criminal conspiracy requires more than encouragement and shared planning. And what we had documented, the kitchen conversation, the phone calls, the accelerating pressure, was not quite enough to meet that bar in a prosecution we could have confidence in. He remained enmeshed in Patricia Lorne's civil suit, which was proceeding separately. I submitted a voluntary declaration to Miss Lorne's attorney. It was 3 pages, single-spaced, outlining everything I knew of Jordan Voss's methods, his involvement in the plan against my family, his pattern of targeting women with financial access, and the way he had used Abigail as a resource while maintaining another relationship entirely. Bill advised me I was not legally required to provide this. I told Bill I was morally required to provide it, and that was the end of that conversation. Patricia Lorne was 63 years old, and had been taken for $61,000 by a man who had done the same thing before, and would do it again to someone else if the people who knew about him stayed quiet. I was not going to stay quiet. During Abigail's sentence, Jordan visited the Deborah K. Johnson facility. This reached me through channels I won't specify, except to say that when you live in Nashville, and you've been married to the same woman for 50 years, and you are both known quantities in your community, information finds its way to you without your having to seek it. He was reportedly attentive. He brought things. He called. He wrote letters. He maintained, by all accounts, the exact presentation that had brought Abigail to this point. The warmth, the consistency, the version of himself that she had believed in. I said nothing about this to Abigail through the limited channels available during her sentence. I had told her the truth in that conference room. She had heard it. What she did with it after that was her own work to do. She was released after 14 months. Good behavior as Gallagher had anticipated. She went to his apartment the same afternoon. There was a woman there, younger than Abigail, late 20s from what was later described to me. 2 children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2. The woman's name was Renee. She had been with Jordan in what she understood to be a committed relationship for 6 years. She had not known about Abigail by name, She had known about the category of situation Abigail represented, the way women who stay with men like Jordan Voss eventually develop a working relationship with the general while declining to examine the specific too closely. It is its own kind of survival strategy, and I do not entirely blame her for it. The $41,230 that Abigail had taken from the joint household account on Elmwood Drive across 26 months of careful irregular withdrawals, a meaningful portion of it had moved through Jordan's accounts and into the practical shape of Renee and the children's daily life. Rent, presumably, groceries, the ordinary expenses of maintaining a family he had not mentioned to the woman he was using to fund them. The man Abigail had helped rob her parents to build a future with had been, with the proceeds, building a different present for a family she had not known existed. The money she had taken from us had not gone to the partnership she believed she was investing in. It had gone to the very thing, the obligation he hadn't described fully, that had made him press her to move faster in the first place. She called me from a gas station parking lot that afternoon. I could tell from the sound quality behind her, the open ambient texture of outdoor space, cars moving at a distance, the faint mechanical sound of the pumps. She had very little to say, which was different. Abigail has never in her life had very little to say. I didn't know about them, she said. I know. A pause. The parking lot sounds. I know that doesn't fix what I did to you. No, I said. It doesn't. Dad. The longest pause. The kind that has a whole speech inside it that the person cannot figure out how to start. Can I? Abigail. I said it as gently as I know how to say anything, which is not ungentle, despite what this story might suggest. No, not this house. Not anymore. I heard her breathing, the sound of a car pulling into the station nearby, the anonymous sounds of a world carrying on around a woman sitting alone, with a phone in a parking lot, discovering that the person she had counted on her for entirely different reasons. I know, she said. And she was gone. That was the last conversation we have had. I do not know what the next year of her life has looked like, or the one after. I hope she has found something solid to stand on. I hope she has found people who are what they appear to be. I hope, for reasons I cannot fully articulate even to myself, that she has figured out who she is without the mirror of someone else's manipulation to look into. I hope these things without expecting to ever know whether any of them come true. Some doors once walked through, close behind you. She walked through hers. I did not close it. She chose it with the full and deliberate intention of someone who believed she had worked out the angles. I simply declined to reopen it when the angles didn't resolve the way she'd planned. Rebecca and I still live on Elmwood Drive. The house that Abigail and Jordan valued at $400,000 is still ours. Still on the lot with Rebecca's oak trees, which are now, after 50 years of her attention, among the finest trees on the street. The house is still full of the accumulated meaning of a life built deliberately inside it, which is a thing that money can appraise but cannot replicate, and cannot take. The mockingbirds still work the backyard from before dawn to well past dark. They are, as I've mentioned, relentlessly optimistic birds. I have come to have a particular feeling for them. Rebecca's dementia progresses the way it progresses, not dramatically, not in the cinematic way that stories tend to depict these things, but in the real way, which is slower and more uneven and more stubbornly survivable than the dramatic version suggests. Some days she is entirely herself, sharp and funny and fully present, and we have the kind of morning we have been having for 50 years over coffee in the kitchen, with the newspaper in the yard beyond the window. Some days she loses the thread of a conversation and I help her find it again and we move on. Some days are harder than that, and on those days we manage the way we have always managed difficulty, which is together and without making more of it than the day requires. Dr. Randy monitors. We have learned what helps and what doesn't, and we apply that knowledge consistently, which is all anyone can do with a condition that doesn't consult your preferences or your schedule. We have a routine that Rebecca herself designed in her clearer moments, because she is still the most practically intelligent person I have ever known, and she had firm opinions about what her days should look like, even accounting for what her condition might ask of them. We follow the routine. It helps. I updated the trust documents with Bill in the months after everything resolved. The new provisions are specific, thorough, and designed to address every gap that had previously existed, every entry point that had been available to someone with bad intentions and legitimate-seeming access. Bill called the revised documents the most comprehensive personal estate protections he had reviewed in 30 years of practice. I told him that was the point. He said he wished more of his clients came to him after learning something, rather than before needing something. I told him I wished the education had come cheaper. I changed the locks. I removed all third-party account access and established dual authorization requirements for any future modifications, with a designated successor trustee who is neither a family member nor someone who stands to benefit from our estate in any direct way. I am, it turns out, a details man. The details are in order. They will remain in order. People ask me, friends occasionally, the kind of old friends who have been around long enough to ask things directly, whether I regret how it ended, whether I should have found a way to keep the door open, whether a father's love ought to accommodate more than I accommodated. I think about this question seriously, because it deserves to be thought about seriously. What I did not do was close a door on a child who had made a mistake. I did not close a door on imperfection or bad judgment, or even genuine moral failure, because love is, in my experience, considerably more durable than any of those things. What I declined to do, what I will not do, is reopen a door that was walked through deliberately. There is a difference between a child who fails and a child who plans. There is a difference between a mistake and a scheme. Abigail had spoken to an attorney. She had moved money carefully for 26 months. She had brought Jordan Voss into my kitchen and listened to him tell her to move faster while her father sat 20 feet away in the sunroom. These were not failures of judgment. They were choices made by a person who understood what she was choosing. That does not mean I don't love her. I do. Love is not the variable here. What is the variable is what love is able to absorb and what it is not. And I have concluded, quietly, without drama, with the patience that 38 years of engineering and 50 years of marriage have between them produced, that love does not require me to pretend that what happened did not happen, or to make the house on Elmwood Drive available again to someone who evaluated it as an asset to be liquidated. Rebecca asked me one evening in late autumn, the yard gone gold and amber through the kitchen window, in the way Nashville yards go in November. Seriously, as though the season means what it says. She asked me if I was sad. I thought about it for as long as it deserved. Yes, I said, me too. She held her coffee cup in both hands the way she does when she is thinking something through. But I'm not sorry. Neither am I. We sat with that for a while. The yard held its color in the fading light. A mockingbird ran through something complicated and self-satisfied in the oak trees. You know what I keep thinking about, Rebecca said. Tell me, that first Thanksgiving, when he helped clear the table. A pause. I thought he was so polite. I laughed. The real kind. From the chest, no performance in it. Nothing self-conscious about it at all. The kind of laugh that only comes when something has landed exactly where it should. He was very polished, I said. She sipped her coffee. So were you, when I met you. At that church social. I still am. She looked at me with the same eyes she has been looking at me with since 1976, with that clear and level and entirely undeceived quality that I have treasured every day of the 50 years since. You really aren't, she said, and she smiled. I held on to that. The way you hold the things that are still standing after a season that tested what could hold. I am Logan Brent, 75 years old, retired civil engineer. Nashville, Tennessee. I spent 38 years finding the crack in the structure before it became the collapse. That is still what I do. My daughter thought I was helpless. She thought her mother was too far gone to matter. She thought Jordan Voss was a partner. She thought I wouldn't read the fine print. I always read the fine print. I always have. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. We're glad you're here.